Hello and welcome to Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which features interviews and discussions on all issues relating to high quality in the early years and school age care sector. In our episodes, we have a range of speakers who are leaders in the areas that matter to Early Childhood Ireland members. This podcast series is proudly supported by Adventurous Insurance, which offers a comprehensive range of cover at discounted premiums for both business and personal insurance products. So visit www.aricus.ie for more information. I'm Maura Corbett and I work with Early Childhood Ireland. Our series on outdoor play last year was really popular. So for this first series of 2024, we decided to take a deeper look at one particular aspect of outdoor play that we touched on in the previous series and that featured in our Early Childhood Ireland Valuing Outdoor Play event held last March. At that event, Professor Ellen Beta Sansetter spoke and discussed the topic of risky and thrilling play, scary, funny, she calls it. So over the next couple of episodes, we're exploring that more, why we should embrace risky or adventurous play, how we can do that, and look at two specific examples, real tools and fire. My guest for our second episode on this topic is Niki Buchan. Niki is an award-winning author working directly with educators and children as an educator, pedagogical leader, head of centres, as well as founder and owner of her own childcare and education centres. She's a strong advocate for all children's right to a high-quality childhood, and she shares a deep concern about children's mental health and trauma. She trusts children as being capable and competent and believes children have a right to regular access to nature and to have their voices heard. So, Niki, you're really welcome. I'm delighted to talk to you today. And I know some of our members will be familiar with you from having taken part in our nature pedagogy program last year. So it's lovely to talk to you for the podcast, and thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. I'm very honoured to have been asked. And I must say I'm very excited to hear that educators in Ireland can now provide children with real tools and fire experiences. That just evidences that we see children as capable and competent.
I think it's an essential part, isn't it, to this kind of work? I mean, if you know, as I was reading that part of the bio there, I was kind of saying, you know, it's a key sentence, trusting children as being capable and competent. Because if we don't, I suppose, we don't see children as having the ability to handle these experiences properly.
Yes. And what I'm hoping to do today in this session is to reassure educators that we're not giving children totally free rein. You know, if they've never had handled tools, we're not just going to give them a whole big tool bag of exciting tools and say, go for it. Because we still have a duty of care. We still have a responsibility. And we approach this, especially as a new subject or a new activity for children, as professionals with good knowledge of child development and a good knowledge of the children in our care. So that makes it slightly less scary.
Yes.
And I think the important thing to remember is that adventurous play or risky play, whatever you want to call it, I tend to talk about adventurous play, is very important for children's normal development. And that includes babies and toddlers. So in babies and toddlers, you might see it when they're using a metal spoon to eat, because they're still using a real tool. Children need to challenge themselves, and they need to be able to face hazards and take risks. And the benefits, and I can send notes if educators are interested. The benefits are for their children's physical development, their social development, emotional development, and also for mental health. We have a lot of children with mental health issues in Australia, and I know in the UK as well. A lot of anxiety that started, or that is around. So the last thing we want to do is add to that. We want children to be confident. We want them to be resilient. We want them to be able to persevere. And all of that is done extremely well through allowing them to use the tools. They need to practice self-risk assessing. from a very early age. So a baby negotiating steps, or a baby using a metal spade in the garden, is already self-risk assessing, and they might knock their leg with a metal spade and realize that hurts a bit more than the plastic one. Because you need to practice. And if we take away that practice, they're not going to be able to self-risk assess. And we see it in some, even teenagers, young teenagers, who've always been told how to do it, but never the reason why, and have also just been very compliant, is that they can't do it. They can't think for themselves what the possible risks are. So if we want them to be competent self-risk assessors, as babies, as toddlers, as children, as teenagers, and as adults, they need to practice. And if they practice at a young age, then mistakes they make are small mistakes as opposed to big mistakes. And they're in a supervised environment.
I've heard that before, that, if children don't have the opportunities to, like you say, self-risk assess, experience those thrilling experiences when they're younger, when maybe the consequences when things go wrong are a bit less, they don't know how to handle other risks if they haven't had those opportunities as they get older. And sometimes the consequences can be more dangerous, and ultimately there's also a bit, isn't there, I think, about kind of cause and effect, that I was talking to a colleague lately about a baby room that I saw one time in a creche, and the floor of the baby room was padded so that as they learned to walk, they wouldn't hurt themselves when they fell. But it also meant it was nearly like walking on the moon, I felt, because it was an uneven surface. So in many ways, they were more likely to fall than if they were on, a regular marmoleum floor or whatever. So, sometimes we need to kind of sort what the risks are in our head, and kind of, what's the worst that can happen. And that bit of understanding cause and effect is important, isn't it?
It definitely is. And I think childcare centres should actually reflect what is happening in the outside world. The outside world is not like walking on a moon. There's uneven surfaces, there's hard surfaces, there are walls, there's chairs, there's what's very popular is using knives that can't cut, that don't cut the children's skin. But, if we expose children to that and they get quite confident with that, and then we offer them, and then they, go home, or they go to a friend, or they go to a neighbor and they get hold of a real knife, they can actually do themselves quite a lot of harm, because they don't realize that actually knives do cut skin. So sometimes by trying to make it safe for children, we're actually creating far bigger risks and dangers, rather than supporting the children to be able to manage, the object, the hazard, that has a risk to it.
Or the example I used in the episode, the last episode with Chloe, where I talked about, keeping a child away from steps until they're 5 or 6, rather than showing the toddler the safe way to manage stairs.
Yeah. And I often think back to my childhood, we never had those safety gates that you could put everywhere. The children just learned to negotiate.
Yeah.
The stairs.
Yeah, sorry, Niki, carry on.
So I think when we're looking at fire and tools, we have to realize that in the children's context, and especially in an early childcare education and care context, it's actually a kind of play. And it was identified in 2002 by Hughes as deep play type. So when he looked at 16 play types, and that fire and tools, risky, those kind of high risk or relatively high risk opportunities is considered deep play. And then Ellen Sanseter talked about risky play experiences, and she identified fire as also, again, as play, and that's looking at playing with or being near dangerous elements. And the tools is working with dangerous tools. And what Dr. Sanseter identified is that these are urges or drives children have. They're drawn to fire. I actually don't know anybody who's not drawn to fire. And, we use fires in every single celebration throughout the world. So fire has we have like an innate interest in fire. And I would rather that the children practice making fires with educators who understand and know children, who are competent and capable themselves, and should be trusted by, by insurance companies and by colleagues. Rather than the children start making secret fires. And it fascinates me when I ask a room full of educators how many of them made secret fires as children, how many put their hands up. And some of them relate stories that have had quite dire consequences, like burning down the hay shed because they made a fire there, or making fires under their beds. Because, as Dr. Sansita said, it's a drive or an urge. So surely we, as educators, support the children in a supervised environment to get to know, that fascinating element of fire, and the other element is water, the other dangerous element. Yeah, I think that's one of the things to say. In education, it's actually classified as play, which is so important.
So you've mentioned about, fire and water and tools and why we need to consider these as an integral part of how we support play with children. Can you take us through some of, if somebody is saying, okay, I may be ready to try this, what kind of materials do you suggest that educators maybe start with, and how we introduce them to children? What are the starting points that you would suggest to people?
Okay, so I would say, first of all, when we talk about dangerous tools and dangerous experiences, it's often the perception of danger, which is what the children are looking for. So we're not going to give them chainsaws. There's no need for that. When we're looking at saws, we look at junior hacksaws, which are one of the first tools I introduce. It's probably the safest tool. So saws I tend to introduce before hammers or anything else. The other thing that I just want to stress or talk about as well is that the tools that I'm going to introduce now or talk about, they're actually all really good tools to develop muscles, joints, core strength, coordination, all the things we need for handwriting skills. And how much more motivational is it, especially for a young boy or little boy, to be allowed to saw something or whittle something rather than being given a pen and told to practice his handwriting. So for that alone, the tools are important. The other thing is that
I think most children would rather that than the template with trace the line, join the dots.
Definitely, and it really strengthens those little hands. It's like you work with clay, and it really strengthens. And the other thing is that I tend to have agreements with children or rules. So not so much with the toddlers, but with your slightly older children. We talk about, so from about 3 years old, 2.5, 3 years old, we talk about having agreements. And basically I only have 3 rules: is try not to hurt yourself, try not to hurt anybody else, and try not to damage the environment. And then I also talk to the children about, what should we do if people use those tools inappropriately. So if I see somebody attempting to saw the table, I'll go, hang on a minute, remember our agreement. Are you damaging the environment or cutting down a living tree? So that, and also if a child does get hurt by using something inappropriately, we go back to, hey, you're responsible for yourself. You're supposed to keep yourself safe. So what went wrong? So that again, the thinking goes to the child. When I also want to just quickly talk about safety gear. So the one rule is you try and keep yourself safe, keep others safe. Another one is no running with tools ever. So especially in the beginning, you might have a tool zone, and the tools are kept there and the tools stay there. As you get more confident, you will start allowing the children to move those tools around, and then you teach them how to carry them safely, like you would teach them how to carry a pair of scissors. So, because scissors are also just tools. Some people like the children to wear gloves, that you never wear a glove on the hand that's holding the tool, because the hand that's holding the tool needs to have, they need to be able to use all the sensory input that they get from their hand on how to use that tool. You could suggest they put a glove on the non-tool hand. For very young children, it's hard to put the glove on. It's hard to feel the stick or the wood that they're cutting with that as well. And so I've done a benefit risk assessment on having gloves or not having gloves. So for the junior hacksaw, I don't insist on the child putting gloves on. I just make them aware that how close is the blade to your hand? What could happen if? And then you would hurt yourself, and our agreement is you're going to try not to hurt yourself. But if you feel more confident and you think your parents would be happier with the children having gloves, make sure it's on the non-tool hand. The same with goggles. So goggles are really good if the children are sawing something above their head, or if they are using hammers to smash porcelain or something that splinters or fractures. But otherwise, the goggles tend to, they struggle to sit on their heads. It tends to obscure the vision a little bit. But again, you do, as an educator, you can do your own benefit risk assessment on these. But so I don't insist on goggles. So the first tool I introduce is the junior hacksaw. I find
Sorry,
that
while we're talking about kind of the rules, and before you go into the tools, is there a group size? Is this 1-to-1? Is it with 2 or 3 children? And I presume it's the children who are interested.
Yes, I would never call them all together. I would bring out a saw and sit down and start sawing. And those that are interested will come up and ask. And I would have, maybe when you first start, you would have 2 saws or 3 saws. So maximum, which means only 3 children can use it. So everybody can have a little go. Later on, when you're confident and you know your children's capabilities, I had 5 or 6 saws, and they didn't need to be supervised because I trusted the children and I never had an incident. But in the beginning, for your own sake, a small group, the others can watch. You might have later on, so you introduce 1 tool at a time. I do introduce the saws first, and the children can saw. If I find that they're all desperate, I might get them all to have a little turn, have 1 or 2 little saws, and then the next child. But again, the educators know how to work with their children and their community. Yeah, I wouldn't have 20 saws because then you can't monitor that. I would have, and also it's really good to learn, share, take turns. And later on, when you introduce the other tools, you could have 3 of each, depending on how many children you've got, so that you can, and there's some that need more monitoring than others. And if they're all in the same area, it's very easy to monitor. I think the other thing to think about is the parents. So we need to nurture our parents and reassure them that you're not introducing big knives at this stage. You're not introducing chainsaws. You are introducing child appropriate tools that have been used forever. Share the research with the parents as to why it's important for children to work with tools, and I can send you that research. Share with them your benefit risk assessments, because that's something I would suggest you do, is that you write down the benefits of using the tools and the risks. And I'm happy to send those to you as well, and you can adapt them to yourselves. And then also for the educators, before you give it to the children, sit down with each other or on your own and have a go with the tools. Try and saw your hand. And I can tell you, with the junior hacksaw, you can pull it across your hand and you won't draw blood. You have to push quite hard to draw blood, but it's very effective to cut. So through the educators trying all the different things with the saws, they'll realize that actually, they're not as dangerous as we think they are very often. And when I do practical sessions, which is how I usually introduce them, and I have it and I get the educators to really experiment with them, they go, oh, is this it? Oh, no, I feel quite comfortable now. So I think it's the unknown that's fearful for educators and for parents. I think, as I said, the junior hacksaw is the first tool. And I'll often go to the hammer. The hammer to me is something I use at a woodwork bench, not so much in nature or outdoors, because what you do with a hammer is you knock nails in. With the children, I first demonstrate how we use the tool. So I'll bring out the saw and I'll go, look what I've got. What does anybody know what this is? And some of them will have a guess, which is great. Some of them won't know. And then I'll show them that it can cut a piece of wood or a stick. And I'll demonstrate. But I'll also, then I move my hand too close to it and I'll accidentally, on purpose, sort of pretend the blade is slipping. And I'll go, oh no. But I use visual, so I use action so that it's visual, and I also use sound. And so when I pretend the blade is slipping, I'll go, And then often they'll say, you cut at your finger. And I'll say, what am I doing wrong? And they'll say, you've got to they'll either say, move the hand away or move the blade away. I go backwards and forwards. And a saw is not a hammer, so that when you see children trying to use it as a hammer, I go, that's the wrong tool. If you want a hammer, get a hammer. The saw is for sawing. Because the biggest risk is if they use it as a hammer, that they might get too close to their hand. Remind them to keep themselves safe and others safe. And they also ask them, what should we do if people use them inappropriately, so that they think of the consequences. And usually they'll say they can never use the saw again. And I'll go, okay, well, let's just hang on. Maybe they just need to put the saw away and think about it, and then they can have another go, so that there are consequences to using it inappropriately. So with the hammers, I use small, lightweight hammers, preferably the ones that are rounded at the back, not the claw hammer. Lightweight, because at that age, they don't need a heavy hammer, because they're not going to do heavy work. So they can do more damage with heavy. For your toddlers, and even for some of your children, if you haven't used it before and you're concerned about it, you might start with golf tees and hammer them into softwood or something like a pumpkin. Okay, so they can practice the hammering, but it's achievable for them. And then progress to big-headed nails. One tip is, don't hold the nails for the children, because if you hold the nail, they'll lift the hammer right above their head and have a whack. If they hold it, they'll just give it little taps. You can also, for your younger children, tap the nail in part of the way so that there's no holding needed, and they just tap it in the rest of the way until they've got the coordination. There's also a handy trick is to cut a slit in a stick and put the nail, put that around the nail so they're holding the stick and they hammer the nail. But actually, you know what? If they're hammering it and they hammer their nails, it's their fingers, it's a really good learning opportunity. And you go, we just have to hammer a bit slower or a bit more carefully. That's the hammers.
And when they're light, they won't do too much damage. If they do give it's a tap, the same as maybe stubbing your toe off a door. It's not a major injury.
I've never had a serious injury with children using hammers. To me, I'm more concerned about them bashing all the trees in the forest or things like that. That's why I don't have the hammers out there. And I don't want nails we don't put nails in trees either. So it tends to be something we use at a woodwork bench, or you might have a big log, like a partly decayed log, and they can hammer into that because it's soft. And then you just tap it, that's the hammering spot. So find a nice big old tree trunk and let them hammer into that.
Do you take the nails out of that then at intervals, or just get a new log? Because I've seen some where there were so many nails in it, it was hard to find a fresh spot. So you just get a new log if there are too many nails.
You get a new log, or you get a children's, like a claw hammer, and you show them how to take the nails out, because that's another sort of activity or opportunity for them for fine motor coordination, and also to talk about, we need to take some of these nails out because they're not good for the trees. But in some ways, it's like undoing what they've done. So again, use your professional judgment on what works better. But certainly if it's full, then you would have to provide another log or remove some of them.
So moving on then, so you've saws, you've the hammers.
With the saws, I just want to say, with the junior hacksaws, sometimes educators will go and they will write in their risk assessment that the children can saw their fingers off. Now, I want to see the educator stand there while the child very patiently saws their fingers. They don't do it. The worst injury I've ever had is a tiny nick, and the nick is a bit like a paper cut, but it heals faster, and it is actually less painful because the edges are jagged, so it does heal faster. But what the children do is they come up to you and they squeeze the finger as hard as they can, and they go, "Look, Niki, I got blood." And then it's like a celebration. And when the parents come and pick them up, they'll go, "Look, Mum, I sawed my finger." And again, that sounds so much more exciting than, "Oh, look, I got a paper cut." And the other thing I find is that children often won't come and tell you. They'll get their little scrape, they'll rub it, they'll sort of rub it on their trousers or behind their back, and then they go back to their activity because they don't want to stop. They don't ask for Band-Aids. There's no time. It's such an exciting thing. So just remember that this most serious injury is a tiny nick from a junior hacksaw, equivalent to a paper cut.
Okay, that's reassuring.
Yeah, that's why I love the junior hacksaws. When you're using the bigger saws like bow saws, but you're not going to use them straight away. That's along the line. When you use the bigger saws, yes, then they put gloves on. But for the junior hacksaws, because I know that the injury is so minor, but it's actually also good for them to know that, yes, the saws can cut. So it's a very minor cut. Again, for your toddlers, you might start with cardboard, or, and also when I talk often about toddlers and all children, it's also children with disabilities. So if you've got a child who's got muscular weakness or something, you might start with something softer like cardboard, styrofoam, although some educators really struggle with the sound that comes from that. Courgettes, soft vegetables like courgettes,
Okay.
or soft wood, and thinner sticks. And the other thing with the junior hacksaw is to remember it needs to be dry wood, because if you're cutting green wood, you'll get all the bits of the green fresh stuff stuck in them. And just remind them to keep the blade away from the finger. So if you walk past and you see the finger a bit close, you'll go, what could happen if the blade slips? And they'll go, I can't cut myself. And you go, okay, what should you do? Put away. So get them to think about it. The next tool is the whittler. Now, the whittler is basically a potato peeler. And the ones that I tend to use are the Lancashire potato peelers because they've got a fixed blade. And the whittler is a really good precursor to children using a knife. I would suggest at this stage, because it's so new, that you don't introduce knives yet, but that can be later on. But use the whittler. Again, demonstrate safe use. So you always whittle or peel away from you. Children love peeling the green bark off sticks. And so I've seen children sit for nearly an hour just whittling away in their own world. So really good, relaxing exercise. And when they're using tools like the whittler or the palm drills, I talk about children having a safe space around them. And I actually call it a blood bubble, which they love. It sounds so nice and gory, a blood bubble. So basically your blood bubble, yeah, or a safety blood bubble, whatever you want to call it. Basically, that is the space, if you stretch your arm out with a tool, that nobody can come into that space. Yeah, so if their friends come a bit closer, they've got to stop doing what they're doing and saying, hey, you're coming into my blood bubble, or you're coming into, you're not in a safe space, or I'm busy with this. So it's their job to stop, because one of the agreements is that you try not to hurt your friends. I've never had a child injure another child with a whittler or a palm drill, but just, extra, I'd rather have the safety in it than not have it in there.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the last one I want to introduce is the palm drill. Now, the palm drill is basically a drill with a wooden stem. So instead of having a proper drill that we might be more familiar with, where you need two hands, you need one hand that holds the top and you need one hand to turn. With this one, the palm drill, the wooden bit goes into your palm and you rotate the wrist to make the hole. So it's, again, a really good rotation of wrist exercise. For that, and what they use it for is to make holes in leaves or in soft wood or even cardboard. Okay? Again, it's not a hammer, so they need to rotate, not hammer with it. Younger children could make holes again into pumpkin or watermelon. The amount of watermelons in Australia that the children filled with holes, because you can still eat it afterwards. I mean, it only goes through the white bit, basically. So it's not wasting the vegetables, but a really good exercise for them. So those are the tools I would start with.
You've touched a little bit. That's really helpful to have that kind of graduation and the tools that you use and how to introduce them. So you've mentioned about, before you introduce them to children, becoming familiar with them yourself, doing your risk benefit analysis, and any other tips or suggestions on overcoming our own fears and apprehensions. And then, if you have parents who are, still not convinced, even though you show them the research, you talk about the lack of injuries and reassure them that children aren't going to, end up in A&E for what's essentially a paper cut. If you have parents who are still reluctant, have you suggestions or ideas? on helping them to overcome those fears and apprehensions?
I would definitely show them the tools and talk to them about how you're going to manage the risk, because that's what parents need. I think if you've got very anxious parents, and sadly we do have a lot of anxiety in amongst parents, at some stage you have to say, well, actually, as the educator, you have to trust me. I'm the professional, I'm the educator. This is a tool that will help your children develop their handwriting. It's a school readiness tool, because it teaches perseverance and resilience, because they've got to do things in a certain way. So as an educator, you know the benefits, and I try and nurture the parents and bring them along. But if the parents, if you're unable to convince the parents, I wouldn't deprive the whole group of this experience, because you know the benefits. So it's either excluding that child, which is really harsh, but I ask the parents to tell their child that they don't want their child to use the tools. And it doesn't come from you, because then it's like discrimination. So the parent has to explain to their child why they can't use the tools. Every time I've suggested that to the parents, they've backed off and said, oh, well, it's okay. Because they don't want to be the one to tell their child. They want us to ban it from all the children, not just from their child.
Okay.
But my first thing is to nurture the parents. I try everything. I let them handle it. I show them what we're cutting. I show them the risk assessments. In fact, I hand it home, because sometimes parents might come and say, well, have you thought of this? Then you go, oh, no, I haven't. Actually, let's put that in. As far as the parents, and as far as the educators are concerned, one tip you could do, for example, when the saws come, the little junior hacksaws, the blades are sharper than if they've been used a bit. So as an educator, you practice with your saw, and then you'll take away the sharpest bits, so that it becomes a little bit less. So when I've introduced them to children for the first time, I always have a few saws myself, just to take away, the sharpness away. I don't want to, it'll still cut, it still works. I mean, I'm still using the same blades that I used 5 or 6 years ago, and they still cut very effectively.
Okay. And I presume that helps you to overcome your own apprehensions, as well, as that, as you use the tools yourself, you
Yes.
realize that it's not as hazardous as you might have thought at the start, and your confidence grows with each group that you introduce the experience with.
Yeah. And remember, the tools are not loose parts. They can't be used in any place or anywhere or in any way. There's very specific ways of using them. It's a skill that we teach. So if you've got the children and you've got your little tool zone, so you know that the tools are only in that little area, you've only got 3 saws, so you've only got 3 children you have to monitor. There might be 2 of you watching those 3 children, so that you can, especially in the beginning, because yes, anything new we introduce causes anxiety or causes stress. So in the beginning, you might say, oh, look, I need 3 educators. And so you make sure all the other children are fine and safe, and you might be there with 3 children and 3 educators. So as long as your ratios are appropriate, you'll get to a stage, which is where I was, where the children had free access to them. They could go and fetch them whenever they wanted to. They could take them anywhere in the forest. They just had to bring them back, because otherwise you lose them.
Okay.
But initially, and also it is there's not many things I do with children that are controlled, but using the tools, there is a certain amount of control, because as I said, they're not loose parts. It is a kind of play, but it is managed. So it is, taking turns, not grabbing from each other, some of the usual stuff that you would do with the children. So whenever I've got educators to actually make something or use the tools, they've always go, oh, is that it?
Okay.
So definitely having a go with it. Make something, show the children how you can make something. And in the beginning, the children use the tools for the sake of using a tool. But when it's always out, so I would say the more you have it out, the more familiar the children become with it, the safer it actually becomes, because it doesn't become a novelty, or the novelty wears off. And then they start using the tool for a purpose. So they might say, oh, I need to cut this. What can I use? This can't use scissors. Oh, I can get the saw, and I know where it is. Yeah.
Okay.
In the beginning, use professional judgment and your knowledge of the children on how to manage that. But your goal is to be able to let it go. But I would say, certainly, don't make it something that comes out once a month. Have it every day, so that the children become familiar and the novelty wears off. And
Okay.
then it's used like a tool, like you would use scissors or a pencil or a pen.
And we've kind of touched on fire a couple of times, in the same way as you introduce real tools. What would your tips be, suggestions, ideas for introducing fire with children?
Okay, fire is a very exciting element. As I say,
it's probably the one that I would be the most apprehensive about.
okay.
So, I'm interested to hear, what the first steps are, because it's true what you say, there's nothing like gathering around a fire, even at a social gathering, the fire, the hearth, it becomes the focal point, a gathering point, and there's something about the flames but there's the undeniable potential for danger as well. So I'd love to hear what how you take that to.
I guess I think in the olden days, children had natural exposure to fire, which a lot of them don't have anymore. A lot of homes have got gas or central heating, so there isn't a fire. There's people use gas barbecues, so again the fire is not as prevalent as it used to be. So with that has come the fear of fire. So first of all, write a benefit risk assessment. And so I always write down what are all the benefits, and then the hazard is your fire, because children can get burnt or it can go out of control. And then what are the risks? And when we look at risks, we're looking at what is the likelihood of something happening and the consequences. Write that down. Make sure you've always got a bucket of water near you, because you need not ice water, but just room temperature water, tepid water, within easy reach, so that you can extinguish a fire if it goes out. Or it's also first aid for children, because as an educator, you need to know that what is the first aid. General first aid is, if you've got a burn, you hold it under tepid running water for 10 minutes. If you're outside or you're in the bush, or not the bush, the forest, then you can have the bucket of water, they can put their hand in, they can stir it and count to 100. It sort of gives you the same effect. So you need to know what it is. I've never had to administer first aid, and I've never had a fire go out of control, even when I've had fathers helping. They don't do little fires, they do big fires, bonfires for everything. So, knowing that this is the first aid, this is what we do, is important. Some of the other rules is they're not allowed to run near a fire or step over a fire. Okay, so, and also make sure that there's no trip hazards around a fire. And so this is all sort of common sense stuff. The other thing is that I never offer the children matches or lighters, because even a baby can light a fire with a match if they get the right movement. I encourage the children to report those to an adult if they see them, so that they get put out of harm's way and small children don't get hold of them. So what we tend to use as the tool is a fire steel, because that does require a fair amount of skill. It also requires a fair amount of perseverance to actually get it going. Sometimes you can be very lucky and the first spark will ignite. Sometimes it takes half an hour. So, but for the children, they get so excited just getting a spark from it. So that's your sort of first fire. The sparks that you get from a fire steel, I use one called a dragon sneeze, which is made in the UK and England. It has two big wooden handles, which means the children can manipulate it safer, and also children with disabilities can use them. And I can use them. So they're much easier to use than the fiddly little things that sometimes got. And the sparks that come from them are similar to the sparks you get from a sparkler. So I don't know if you remember sparklers as children. You never burn yourself on the sparklers. You always burn yourself by touching the dead sparkler, after it's burned. But the actual sparks themselves don't. So I tend to introduce fires when children show an interest and they start making pretend fires. Okay, so when they start doing pretend fires, then I start having conversations around that. I'll join them around the pretend fire, help them make a pretend fire. I might even put in a pretend tea light in there, have conversations, find out what do they know about fires. Has anybody got a phobia about fires? has anybody had an incident that you need to be aware of? So that gets done safely around a pretend fire. And talk about, what, like they've just stepped over it. You'll go, but could you do that if that was a real fire? So that you have all those conversations around that. Then I would introduce a tea light candle. Maybe at the lunch table, have a little, not the artificial ones, not the LED ones, but the real ones. Or maybe when you're reading a story, you can have a candle. And then let the children feel the heat. So, even you don't have to touch the flame for it to be hot. You can feel the heat. You can feel the heat radiating. So that's all language I use. Heat, spreads. Once you're comfortable with that, and the children have developed a certain respect for that, they first take great delight in blowing out the candle every time you produce it. And you spend your time relighting the candle. Now, the candles, you can't use a fire steel and the children don't light it. Yeah, that's I use matches for that, just to demonstrate to the children. So first they take great delight in blowing them out all the time, and then I'll go, okay, last time. And if they blow it out again, then that's it. Because after a while, I get tired of having to relight the candle. But they love the excitement. And the first day, I'll let it go a bit, and then I'll go, no, okay, that's enough now.
It's like dropping the spoon off the high chair, the baby.
Yes.
They take great delight, and the adult takes great delight for a while until it's happened for the 50th time, and that's enough.
That's enough. And the child's just experimenting, and that's what we want children to do. But yeah. So once you're comfortable with that, then I introduce what I call a laboratory fire and the fire steel. So I'll get the fire steel, I'll show the children how it can make sparks, and then I'll let them all have a go. And remember, if you've got your fire steel, play with it. Try it. Usually when I'm doing a lesson, I'll demonstrate to the educators that, and I'll flick it, I'll put it on my skin. And I'll say to them, it doesn't burn, it doesn't ignite straight away. It would be, if I had a very combustible fabric on, it would still take a lot to get it going. Actually, a really good tip, if you're wanting to start a fire to make it slightly easier, is to use cotton wool with a bit of Vaseline on it. So you just dip the cotton wool in the Vaseline, and you put it on top of your small sticks, and then you get the fire steel, because you have a much higher rate of success, or it's much easier. So the laboratory fire is a small fire in a container. I use often a stainless steel salad bowl. So it's a contained fire. I get the children to help me collect sticks. They have to be dry sticks, but again, it's a laboratory fire. So they learn that if they've got green sticks, it's going to make a lot of smoke, and that's not pleasant. So we look for the dry sticks. The sticks have to fit within the container. They can't hang over the edges. And I explain to the children, because the fire goes upwards, and it's going to go all the way to the top, and then it might fall over the edge. Then I'll give them the fire steels and let them have a go with it. They need a lot of perseverance and practice. Later on, they become experts at it. And I always say to the children, when your hand gets tired, pass it on to somebody else. And I'll model that. A lot of what I do is modeling. So I'll use it for a bit, and if it doesn't work, I'll go, oh, my hands are tired. Pass it on to the next person who wants to have a go. You might find some children that are very fearful or anxious will go, no, I don't want to touch it. And I don't ever force a child. So if they don't want to touch it, but then when they see all their friends doing it, and over time, they'll join in. And then once the fire is lit in your little bowl, you do have to feed it. So I put, small sticks in there. While you're sitting there with the children, have conversations about the fire. What is it used for? So similar to the pretend fire, this is a time to have conversations. And like when the flames get a bit bigger, I go, oh, the flames are getting bigger. What should we do? They will always tell you we need to move away. Have those and keep asking them, what do you think we should do? I wonder what this is. So that they become, oh, the wind's coming up. The wind's blowing it that way. What should we do? Okay, so that they're part of the solutions. Again, let them feel, put their hands above the fire. So I model and let them feel it's quite hot. It's not anywhere near the fire, but it's still hot. Experiment with that for quite a long time. And then we'll put water on there. So we teach them that the water puts out the fire, and we make them aware of the steam. So, we don't want the steam to go into their faces. I've never had an injury with steam, or even with fire, the worst I've had is a 10-year-old child who was on a holiday camp who touched the marshmallow before he counted to 10, and he got a little red mark on his fingers. Okay, so again, it's very controlled and very managed. We haven't, in the UK, we haven't got to the stage where we have fires going without adult supervision. So if you go to the Scandinavian countries, they have a fire burning all the time. The children arrive with knives attached to their backpacks that they can access at any time, big bladed knives. So it's a totally different culture. Yeah, maybe one day we'll get there, but we're not there. So, we do it step by step.
Yeah, but it's step by step. And, I think we've kind of come full circle in that, because everything you've said in the last couple of minutes is about trusting the children, building up their competence, believing they can manage it. And I suppose that's kind of where we started the conversation. So, Niki, thanks. There's so much practical reassurance there. I think everything you've said will give people the confidence to kind of say, maybe this is something we can think about and start to do. So thank you so much.
Can I just say one more thing, that
Sure.
With the fire, initially, it's just about making the fire. It's about the process, not making the fire. The children can use the charcoal. So I show them they can use the charcoal to draw with, or you can crush it to make black paint. Then you could advance on to cooking, but maybe we can look at cooking at another stage. But simple things like marshmallows or cubed apples, or a cubed bread, so they can make a little bit of toast. And then the biggest risk is that we don't want them to put that straight into their mouth. I've never had a child do it. I've had a child put it close, and then they feel the heat, and then they move it away. So food comes afterwards, but the beginning is just about feeling comfortable with them lighting fire. And I just want to finish off with saying, it's very important that we, especially because we have so many children with mental health issues, so many children with anxiety, we live in a very fear-based society, is we don't want to increase fear and anxiety. So all these, the tools and the fire, it's really important that you give them the knowledge and respect for it, and not fear of it. Okay, so and if you're fearful of fire, maybe get somebody else to do it with children, because you don't want to pass that fear on to children. You want them to respect it, but not to fear it.
That's really, really good point. Thank you so much, Niki. Thank you.
No, that's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, and go out there and just try it.
Absolutely. So thank you for listening to this episode of Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which is proudly supported by Aricus Insurance. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and spread the word to your friends and colleagues, and stay tuned for our next episode.